Aggressive gorilla ran toward a woman in a wheelchair. What happened next changed everything. The morning air at the River's Edge Zoological Park was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine and the humid weight of a gathering storm, a heavy atmosphere that seemed to pulse with an unspoken tension. It was a Saturday, and the crowds were pressing against the reinforced glass of the Great Forest exhibit, a sprawling 3-acre habitat designed to mimic the misty emerald lowlands of the Congo. Among the sea of tourists was Margaret, a 70-year-old woman whose life had transitioned into a quieter, slower rhythm over the last decade. Once a pioneering field veterinarian who had spent her youth trekking through the dense undergrowth of Central Africa, Margaret now sat in a sturdy, motorized wheelchair, her silver hair pulled back into a neat bun and her weathered face etched with the deep lines of 1,000 smiles. Beside her, resting a steady, loyal chin on her knee, was her service dog, an aging black Labrador named Jet. Margaret had come to the zoo not for the spectacle of the crowd, but to visit the one soul she felt a lingering, ghostly connection to, a connection that had been forged in the red dust of a Rwandan sanctuary nearly 40 years ago. She moved her chair toward a secluded viewing bubble, a specialized glass dome that allowed visitors to feel as if they were standing directly inside the lush vegetation of the enclosure. She had no way of knowing that within the next 10 minutes, her life would once again be hanging in a balance of terror and wonder, and the entire world would be left breathless by what happened next. Before we reveal the heart-stopping moment, the glass became the only thing between life and a miracle. Remember to like and subscribe so you never miss another incredible story of the bond between humans and animals. And please, let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. We love connecting with our global family. Inside the enclosure lived Malachi, a 480-pound silverback who was notorious among the staff for his unpredictable and often volatile temperament. Malachi was a titan of his species, characterized by a deep, jagged scar running across his right shoulder, a permanent souvenir from a brutal battle with a rival male in his youth, and eyes that were a piercing honey-gold color, filled with a weary, suspicious intelligence. Usually Malachi ignored the tourists, treating them as nothing more than flickering, meaningless shadows, preferring to sit in the deep shade of a massive, ancient-looking baobab tree. But today was different. The barometric pressure from the approaching storm had made the air heavy with static, and the relentless noise of a group of unruly teenagers further down the line, who had been banging on the glass and mocking his movements, had pushed the silverback to his absolute limit. He was a king in a cage, and his patience had finally shattered. As Margaret steered her wheelchair into the quietest part of the viewing dome, she found herself alone, separated from the main crowd by a thicket of bamboo and ferns. She looked up, adjusting her glasses, and her heart skipped a beat. Malachi was standing just 15 feet away, his hair standing on end, his lips pulled back in a terrifying snarl that revealed his massive canines. He let out a rhythmic, booming hoot-dash vocalization, a sound that vibrated in Margaret's very bones. This wasn't a play display, this was a high-intensity charge from an animal who had decided he had seen enough of humanity for one day. Without a second of hesitation, Malachi erupted into motion. The silverback launched himself forward with a speed that defied his massive bulk, his knuckles pounding the earth with a sound like a localized earthquake. He wasn't running past the bubble, he was running directly at it. The sheer physics of the moment were incomprehensible. Half a ton of pure, primal muscle moving at 30 miles per hour toward a 70-year-old woman who had no way to run, no way to hide, and no way to defend herself. The crowd further down the glass began to scream in a chorus of panic, and zoo security scrambled for their radios, shouting for an emergency tranquilizer team. But there was no time. Margaret sat frozen, the hum of her wheelchair's motor the only sound in her ears, her wrinkled hands gripping the armrests until her knuckles turned white. She didn't scream, and she didn't close her eyes. Instead, she did the one thing her soul told her to do. She leaned forward, her face just inches from the glass, and spoke a single whispered word that was lost to the wind outside. She looked directly into Malachi's honey-gold eyes, offering him the only thing she had left, her unwavering gaze. Just as the gorilla reached the glass, his massive body colliding with the reinforced pane with a force that made the entire dome shudder and the ground beneath Margaret's wheels groan, something happened that silenced the world. Malachi didn't beat his chest in a victory display. He didn't continue to strike the glass in a rage. Instead, the very millisecond his eyes locked with Margaret's, his entire demeanor shifted in a way that defied every law of animal behavior. He slid to a halt, his massive, leathery hand pressing flat against the glass right in front of Margaret's face. The shocking part wasn't the violence of the charge. It was the profound, sudden tenderness that followed it. The aggression vanished from his face as if it had never been there, replaced by a look of intense, furrowed brow concern that looked hauntingly human. He began to hoot softly, a low-frequency, melodic sound used by gorillas to comfort injured or grieving members of their own troop. Malachi leaned his massive forehead against the glass, his eyes scanning Margaret with a desperate, searching intensity, moving from her silver hair to her shoulders and then down to her seated position. He did something that brought the running security guards to a dead stop. He looked at the mechanical wheels of her chair, then back at her aged, fragile frame, and let out a long, mournful sigh that fogged the glass. He began to mimic the motion of her wheels with his hands, making a slow, circular gesture in the air, his eyes filled with a recognition so deep it felt ancient. He wasn't attacking a stranger. He was recognizing a ghost from his infancy. 40 years ago, when Margaret was a young veterinarian in Rwanda, she had rescued a tiny, sickly infant gorilla whose mother had been killed by poachers. That infant was Malachi. She had carried him against her own chest for 3 months, feeding him from a bottle and sleeping on a floor mat beside him to keep him warm. She had been his first mother, the one who had healed the jagged scar on his shoulder when it was a fresh, weeping wound. When the sanctuary's funding was cut, Malachi had been moved through various institutions before landing at this zoo, and Margaret had eventually aged out of the field, her legs failing her in her later years. But Malachi, with a memory that spanned decades and a heart that had never truly said goodbye, didn't see an old woman in a wheelchair. He saw the person who had given him his life. He recognized the specific, rhythmic way she hummed, a habit she still kept, which had been picked up by his sensitive ears even through the glass. For the next 30 minutes, the aggressive silverback sat in the dirt, refusing to move an inch. He began to gather handfuls of clover and soft moss from the floor of his exhibit and pressed them against the glass, offering them to Margaret as if he were trying to provide for her, trying to care for his aging mother in the only way he knew how. Margaret, tears streaming down her face and soaking into the fabric of her blouse, placed her hand on the glass directly over his massive palm. The crowd, which had been recording what they thought would be a viral animal attack video, stood in a stunned, tearful silence. The silverback with the jagged scar was no longer a display. He was a son protecting a parent. He positioned his massive body between Margaret and the loud, intrusive sounds of the rest of the zoo, shielding her from the world. He stayed there, his honey-gold eyes never wavering from hers, until the zookeepers gently cleared the area. Even as she began to back her chair away, Malachi followed her along the glass line for as far as his enclosure would allow, his hand never leaving the pane, watching his oldest friend until she disappeared from view. The footage of the guardian and the grandmother went viral within hours, reaching millions of people, but the real impact was felt in the heart of the woman who thought she had been forgotten. Moved by the profound intelligence, emotional memory, and empathy displayed by Malachi, the zoo directors granted Margaret a lifetime honorary matriarch pass. They realized that the bond between these two had survived 40 years of separation, proving that the heart of a gorilla is a vessel of infinite memory. Now, every Tuesday morning, Margaret rolls her chair to the glass dome. Malachi is always there, waiting. He doesn't charge anymore. He sits quietly, presses his hand to the glass, and listens to Margaret tell him stories of the Rwandan forest where they first met. Malachi showed the world that even the most powerful creatures are moved by the memory of love, and that no matter how much time passes or how much our bodies change, the soul never forgets its first kindness. Did this story of a 40-year bond and a gorilla's incredible memory touch your soul? If you believe that animals never forget the hearts that loved them, even after a lifetime apart, please write yes in the comments below. Your interaction helps us grow this community, so we can continue to bring you these powerful stories of hope, memory, and animal intelligence. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you can stay updated on the beautiful, ongoing journey of Malachi and Margaret. Your support is the reason we can tell these stories, and we are so grateful to have you with us. Thank you for watching, for caring, and we will see you in the next story where the heart of the wild proves once again that we are all more connected than we ever dared to imagine.